So our ultimate goal with the love languages obviously is we're going to move everybody towards this vitality model, which is what we talked about on the last call. And that's really the end outcome, that tip of the pyramid that we talked about on our hierarchy, which is connection. We hold that vision for everybody. Just because they come in and they say, I don't like the bump on my neck, that doesn't matter to us what they say. We have no ownership over that we didn't like it. It's not relevant. It's not what we see. We just acknowledge that is where they are at. And then as we start to use these tools, we're going to start to slowly move them towards this vision. And how do we link that to the fact that they really aren't living their most vivid experience in life? And that we're able to not only see that based on what we observe when the assessment, but we're going to be able to see that in what we do with our vital signs as well, which is a loss of that vitality within the vital system called the nervous system. And those are just health biomarkers along the way that let us know that there's some neuro change happening, and neuro change is good change. So that brings us to how we created our vital signs. And the reason we're just going to talk about them really briefly today is so that you can see that that's the second place where we can identify a love language. The vital signs were formed for our belief and what we do in our practice on three main things that that obviously when the spine doesn't move, there is a segmental distortion of however you call that. Really, depending on your technique, you're going to call it something different, but there's something happening particularly at certain segments. That does lead to a structural change. It leads to it 100% of the time, and it leads to it immediately. So the degree in that structural change all depends on time, obviously, because we know that immediately the body starts to lay down scar tissue to immobilize that area even more. It does that to stabilize the area and protect the area. And then, of course, we know within a very short period of time, a couple of weeks, that we can start to see osteophytes forming. So it happens quickly. The structural change happens incredibly quickly when a vertebra can no longer move through a full range of motion the way it's supposed to. You cannot have those two happen also without the simultaneous global physiological change that happens in the nervous system. And each of these three areas not only speak to the three love languages that we have, but they also speak to, obviously, the vital signs that we created, that those things happen all at the same time. And obviously time, you throw time in there and you try throwing cumulative factors, trauma, all sorts of stuff in it. And then, of course, we're on a pendulum. You know that pain is not an indicator of any of these things. That we know that all of this can happen, pain, and actually zero ability of the brain to even be able to perceive, because we talked about neuroception last time, that something is actually going on where the brain actually has a sensory feedback loop where the person goes, oh, now something's going on for me. We, as you know, studied a lot under Dr. Michael Hall, and early on he said something that also solidified how we practice and what we measure. And what he said, and it just is so interesting, is that he said tone precedes autonomic dysregulation 100% of the time. So what he means by that is that somebody's autonomic tone. So tone is an interesting topic, and I talk about tone, and so it depends on your way of explaining tone, depending on your technique and your philosophy. Tone to me is what the tissue feels like to you as the chiropractor. Somebody was saying, well, I think it's a vibrational energy. I don't really care. Again, this is like a love language. I don't care how it's described. Tone is tone. So this is the same as a subluxation. I have no ownership how you describe it. It's just the fact that when you lay your hands on somebody, there's an overall tone to the system, and it's dysregulated prior to even autonomic dysregulation, which is very interesting because that tells you that early on, even if somebody doesn't have any major change that you can necessarily see, you can lay your hands on them and you can actually tell that they're dysregulated, and by virtue of their tone. So I think I always say to practice members, one of the things that we look at the expression of who you are through tone. And tone means, if we were to lay our hands on you, the chiropractor, they can feel your life to date. That's the best way I can describe it. You actually lay your hands on somebody prior to anything really significantly dysregulating in the system. And if you just leave that over years, of course, you're going to have enough end damage that you now see the autonomic dysregulation turn into end organ damage or end result of a disease. And now you're in the far end of the pathogenic model and you have enough symptoms that you get a diagnosis of some kind of disease. So these really for us were the foundational parts of the subluxation love languages and the vital signs for us. And that we ascribe to the fact that all three of these have to happen. They happen at the same time. They're not separate. And that this has really made us happy because we were like, this is really where you cannot really be a mechanist without a vitalist, without being a vitalist. And you can't be a vitalist without being a mechanist. We are pieces of a whole, and we're a whole made of pieces. So we're not going to go over, obviously, the biomarkers necessarily. I just want you to see examples, though, so you can understand. Like we have, global physiological markers. We have more structural markers. We have more stress-orientated markers. We used to do a lot of x-rays in our office only on the first visit from the perspective of just seeing how long the spine has been in the pattern it's been in, so we could look at curvature and misalignment and any breakdown. We don't do that as much anymore because in the province we live in, people now have to pay for what used to be a publicly funded service. These are all things we used to do. We do a combination of things today that are a little bit different, but chest expansion, which is where you're looking really at the ability for the lungs to expand. Tandem gait, Romberg's balance, Mittelmeyer's, that's spelled wrong, Mittelmeyer's, I should say, or marching in place. We did HRV, heart rate variability, which I think probably is now today. In the old days, that was even before HRV, we did pulse ox and resting heart rate and pupillary constriction. And what we were looking for is we were looking for the sympathetic state of the autonomics. Today, we have HRV, which is probably the gold standard now for looking at really that the nervous system is in. And then, of course, we do electromyography and thermography in our practice. We do fingers to the floor, test called fingers to the floor, and multiple other things, posture pictures. There's a million things you could do. The key is, like I said on the first call, it doesn't really matter what you do on the first visit. It matters the premise that you have, because you can do all of these tests in a pathogenic model. You can do all of these tests with an intention that you're trying to find out what is wrong with somebody. You can do them from the perspective of that internal promotion of their resources, of what is really strong for them. And we use the word neurochange in our office. We use the word plasticity in our office. And we use the word adaptability, because we know that with really chaotic or incoherent tests, somebody is not adaptable. They're not resilient. They don't have that bounce back that we want. And long-term, vitality is not about an end outcome that all of a sudden they're well or healthy. It really is about their ability to bounce back. That is the ultimate vision for us, and that is what we want to hold for people, because things are going to happen to them. And we know that the more plasticity we see, the more change we see, the more moving towards that state of ease through the measurement, we know that they're going to be more resilient. And that's very simply put, that's basically what it is. So when somebody doesn't really express a love language, the next question is, well, how would you figure that out? What happens when you have a multitude of objective findings with people is you can tell based on their response when you do an objective finding. And they go, whoa, that's cool, right? And so especially because a lot of our people have never been to a chiropractor either before or the last experience they had, they went into somebody, they did palpation, they laid them on the table, they got an adjustment, they left, they had no clue what just happened. And a lot of them weren't happy. They felt fine, but they come into our office and they're like, what? I have never seen this before and never had that explanation before. So there's certain things that really resonate with people a lot. That also gives us an indication of what their subluxation love language is. Because just like the laundry was on the floor, I was like, whoa, when he took it upstairs, right? So I was, whoa, when he buys me a new present, there is a response. And that response, if you observe it, goes, oh, yeah, that would be their love language. And that's where I'm going to put a lot of my focus.